Hey Al, okay, so once you have run that little example sketch that we just did, we're going to start to build up our for loop. So really quick before we do that, let's just look over like the basics of your program, which it was obviously in your little start function. All right, so the processing library, it works with two main parts of our program. All right, so we have our setup, anything you want to run once, and sort of stayed the same. You're going to put in setup, and then this is where you get your loop functions from. Okay, so like draw is going to run 50 frames, 60 frames per second over the life cycle of your program, and this is where like any of your updatable functions are going to go. Um, I've just put three separate custom functions down here because I'm going to eventually end up storing my different patterns in these functions. You can go ahead and do that later, but that's just how I started setting things up. Um, One other thing that I want to point out, I'm just going to code as I go, just assuming that everybody's going to be able to kind of pick this up because most of you have done processing before. But if you're confused about any of this stuff, any of these functions that I'm typing, everything is in the reference page. Okay, so like for instance, I do a lot of processing, and sometimes I forget about the differences between P5.js and processing. So I just had to head over here just to remind myself, like, can I just put RGB values in there? Which I'm pretty sure that I can. We can also do, you know, hex codes for our fill. Fill is just how we do our color. But anything that you're confused about, or anything that you're like, actually, I'm not sure how P5.js handles this, or if you've never used processing before, their reference page is awesome. They have everything that you need. Their API search is so great because you could just put anything in here and it'll bring you like right to the file, right? So, you know, if you want more information about Ellipse because you don't remember um, the parameters for an ellipse, it brings you right to the file, and it has this editable interface, so you can actually kind of mess with some things here and see and rerun it. So it's a lot more like W3 School. So here's all your parameters, X, Y, width, height. Super, super easy to use, really interactive. So anything that you're confused about, just head on over to the reference page. Everything that you need is going to be here. We're going to just start working with our basic shapes. Yo, check it out. They have a triangle function. Isn't that exciting? So there's a lot more stuff that you can do with P5.js that's a little bit harder to do with actual processing. I like it a lot better. I feel like it's a lot more fluid. Okay, so let's code. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to write a really simple for loop, okay? And I'll remind y'all the syntax of a for loop. So we're going to do for, and then I'm just going to set up my syntax, okay? And then in here, we're going to do our variable, then we'll do our test, and then we'll do our update. So I'm just going to start writing one for loop with this ellipse in mind, but then we'll make some changes, okay? So I'm just going to do my variable, which, so in processing is going to be int, which is not the way that you declare a variable in JavaScript. So instead of the integer, we're going to use var, right? Because that's how we declare var in JavaScript. So just if you've done processing before, those are like the main changes. That it's just more of like the language changes. Okay, so we'll do var. Let's just do x, and we'll do equals. Let's start with 5. All right, expression terminator here. Next thing, we're going to do our test. So we're going to say if x is less than 500. All right, and then we'll do our update. So I want to add, let's say, 50 pixels to of space in between each ellipse, and I'll explain what's happening just to refresh everyone in a minute. So we're going to do x equals x plus 50. Okay, and let's add in our ellipse, or whatever shape you want to use to start off with. Just grab a 2D primitive. Okay, we'll put this rend in here. Let's just check our, all right, so there's our for loop. There's our draw, so we're good to go. Just make one more space here. Okay, so in order to get this to render out, what we want to do is we want to get this to render out. We want one line of code that's going to render out a bunch of different shapes. That's what a for loop is able to do for at least what we're doing here. You can obviously do a lot more with for loops. So we need to mix our variable into our ellipse, and I'm going to do it with the position to start off with. Okay, so let's just do it on the horizontal axis. So let's put our x in here. So what's going to happen is that Actually, let's just run it and see what happens here. And let's give this like, since our shape is going to be 80 by 80, let's give it like 100 down from the top. So let's refresh here. Whoops. Let me open up my page. Meow, meow. All right. So as you can see, what I am doing is I am drawing a shape. So I'm starting at 5. All right, so I'm starting at 5 pixels. And let's actually, let's start it at, since we have 80, let's start it at 80. Or let's start it at 100 so we can just see what we're doing a bit more. Okay, so let's just go over what's happening here just to refresh everyone's memory. Okay, so I have a variable that is, we start at 100, okay? So I am driving the x position of each ellipse over by 50 pixels every time I run my program. So the first ellipse is drawn at 100, and then obviously all this is compiling. It's 100 down from the top, and it's each circle is 80 by 80. So the first one is drawn at 100, then the second one adds 50 to it, right? Because we update, so we start at 100, and then this runs, and then we add 50 to it here, and then we run it again. So this circle is at 100, this is at 150, and we add another 50 to it. This is at 200, then we go 250, 300, 350, 400, 450. Okay, so then the next thing that I add is going to be 500. Okay, so because my test says x has to be less than 500, so as soon as this validates to true, then I stop running. Okay, so sorry, as soon as it validates to false, right? Every time it's validating as true, like is x less than 500? Why, yes it is. Cool, let me update my variable and draw another ellipse, okay? So for instance, if we decrease this space, so let's say 10, we'll get a lot more shapes because this one we're adding 10 every time, and then this is the last circle that is under 500 in the position, okay? So other things that we can do, we can increase we can decrease the what we're adding and thus increase the shapes, or we can we can increase this. So let's try 1,000. All right, so we'll get a lot more shapes. So that's the super basics of our for loop. And let's just add maybe one more shape. Let's try a rect just so we can see what else is going on here. Oops. Okay, so let's do this one. We'll drive it vertically. So we'll do, let's say we want it to be like, I don't know, start over here. So let's say 100 from the left, and then we'll mix in our variable here, and then let's say we want this to be a square that's going to be 50 by 50. All right, so let's rerun. Okay, so now we have a set of, they look like rectangles, but they should actually be squares because it's the number here. So we have 1,000. So let's just decrease this a bit so you can see a little more, and we'll increase the space in between each, so we can say 100 in between each. Okay, so just to reiterate, we have an ellipse. The first ellipse, actually we'll go over this one again. Okay, so we have a rectangle. Okay, we're drawing it at, every single one of these squares is drawn at 100 pixels from on the horizontal axis. So this is where we're driving them down. So the first one is drawn at 100, and then we go back and we test it and we say, okay, and we update it. So we add 200. So this one's at 200. This one's at 300. This one's at 400. I can't draw another shape because then this will no longer validate as true because 600 is not going to be less than 500, obviously. Okay, so hopefully that explained a for loop again to y'all. That's probably, or re-explained it. That's probably a refresher for some of y'all. So In the next video, we'll make this a bit fancier.